want to take just a moment and think about this question. Do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? I'm going to start by going way. Let's look here then at a couple of early responses to Islam from the side of Christians, right? People thinking now about the relationship between Christianity and Islam. So one early thinker, John of Damascus, emphasized the differences between Christianity and Islam. He says, meaning Muhammad, says there is one God, creator of all things, who has neither been begotten nor has begotten, obviously emphasizing there are Muhammad's differences with, say, the Nicene Creed. He says that Christ is the Word of God and his Spirit, but that he was a creature and a servant, and that he was begotten without seed of Mary, the mother of Moses and Aaron, the sister of Moses and Aaron. A little wrong on that last part, but, he's trying. For he says, the Word of God and the Spirit entered into Mary, and she brought forth Jesus, who was a prophet and a servant of God, which is how Muslims see Jesus. He says that Jews wanted to crucify his shadow, and that they crucified this. That is a Muslim belief that Jesus wasn't really crucified, but only appeared to be. But Christ himself was not crucified, he says, nor did he die, for God out of his love for him took him to himself in heaven. And he says that when Christ had ascended into heaven, God asked him, O Jesus, didst thou say, I'm the Son of God? Jesus, he says, answered, Be merciful unto me, thou Lord. Thou knowest that I did not say this, and that I did not scorn to be thy servant. But sinful men have written that I made this statement, and they have lied about me and have fallen into error. God answered and said to him, I know that thou did not say this word. So John of Damascus here is emphasizing that what Muslims don't believe, specifically about Jesus. They don't believe Jesus is divine. And for John, that's a significant difference with Christianity that must be kept in mind. Another thinker is Timothy of Baghdad, who in a conversation with Muslims says this, when asked what he thinks about Muhammad. Truly, Muhammad is entitled to the praise of all people of reason and of those who love God, because he walked in the paths of the prophets. All the prophets taught the unicity or the oneness of God. Muhammad taught this also, and therefore he also walked in the paths of the prophets. And as all the prophets led the people away from evil and sinful acts and guided them towards righteousness and virtue, so Muhammad led the people of his community away from evil and guided them towards righteousness and virtue. In this manner he also walked in the path of the prophets. Then, as all prophets forbade human beings to prostrate before devils or to worship idols and inspire them to worship God, be he magnified and glorified, and to prostrate before his majesty, so Muhammad forbade the people of his community to worship devils and prostrate before idols, and inspired them to acknowledge God and to prostrate before him, the Almighty, the unique, like unto whom there is no other. Thus it is clear that Muhammad walked in the path of the prophets. So here, a Christian choosing to focus on ways in which Muhammad is like the Christian and Jewish prophets, what unites them. So again, this debate about what to emphasize, difference, commonality, goes way back to the very beginning of Muslim and Christian encounter. So, the same God question. Let's look at some reasons for saying that Christians and Muslims worship the same God, and some against, and then we'll kind of consider what's at stake. So, some scholars argue that yes, Muslims and Christians worship the same God, and they say that on the basis of what they call classical theism. Ideas about God that are shared by Muslims and Christians, and for that matter, Jews and various kinds of Hindus, some would even say Neoplatonists, going back to our friend Augustine. These are ideas such as God is the source of all being, God is immutable, God is one. Christians would say one and triune, but one. So these characteristics of God that are shared across traditions. They then would say that you can be mistaken about a characteristic of a referent, which is different than being wrong about the person. So let me get what they're saying there. So some Christian scholars have said, look, we're not saying that Muslims and Christians are equally right about God. For example, this isn't their example, this is my example, but go with it. Take Jane Austen, British author of novels you should read. Let's say you have two people talking about Jane Austen, and they're talking about her wonderful novels, and how good Pride and Prejudice is and how much they like Emma, and one of them says that Mansfield Park is actually much better than many people think, and that Fanny isn't such a milquetoast character as many people claim. And then the other one says, yes, that's right. And it's interesting that Jane Austen, wrote kind of so many characters who didn't have happy marriages because she had a very happy marriage. The other one says, well, Jane Austen wasn't married. Now, as a matter of fact, Jane Austen wasn't married. Both of these people are talking about Jane Austen. One of them has a more correct understanding of who Jane Austen is, but they're both talking about her. This is basically what these scholars are saying, that people can be talking about the same referent, the one God, but have unequal understandings of that God. So you don't have to say that everybody is equally right in order to say that everybody is talking about the same God. Which goes to this third point that at least some scholars would say, not all of them, but some of them, that saying the same God does not mean that all religions are equally salvific. That you can say that Jews, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Platonists all are talking about the same God, but that some of their traditions have a more reliable path to salvation because they more fully understand that God. Other people are going to argue against using the language of the same God. And again, here I'm talking mainly from a Christian perspective, from what Christians would say. There are some Christians who just say the Trinity is a deal breaker, that if you're not talking about the Trinitarian God, you're not talking about the same God, at least in no way that is really very meaningful. That if Jesus is not divine, then you're not talking about the same God. Many of these people would also say that there's something at stake in these conversations, specifically evangelism. They're concerned that if you say that Muslims and Christians worship the same God, that you cut out the urgency of evangelism. It doesn't seem like it's so important to go tell people about your faith if you say they worship the same God. All right, I'm not settling that question. I just wanted to lay out how different people think about it. Now, just to break things up a little bit, how about a review? So, in Islam, is Muhammad the son of God, a human prophet, God, an angel? Well, hopefully you picked B. A human prophet, not the son of God, not an angel, a human being and the final prophet. In Islam, all prophets before Muhammad taught incorrect doctrine. There was no prophet before Muhammad. Muhammad is the final prophet. Jesus is a more authoritative prophet than Muhammad. That answer is C. Again, Muslims say that Muhammad is the final prophet. There'll be no prophet after Muhammad, but that there were prophets before Muhammad whose message was corrupted by their followers.